Good evening, everybody. It's sort of interesting for me to watch this Tuesday night thing because I have no idea where it's going or what it's about. Each week it's a very different people and different energy and different everything. We spent the first 2 weeks doing what we call termites, which is starting to erode the conditioning that we all have about the material world and about the materiality of this. And we talked, the first termite was to point out how we get caught up in movies and get sucked in by that and all emotional and believe that it's true, even though the reality there is just flickering lights on a screen. And then the second week we said that even more than that, if you're in a dream, that you're convinced the dream is real. And the dream is just like this reality, which we're convinced is real. And those were sort of from Robert's point of view. Robert is always at the very highest point where he's always aware that this is a dream and that there's no reality to what we're experiencing at all. And that's all very nice if you're where Robert is, but then there's no reason to talk about anything or do anything. There's nothing to be said. There's nothing to be done. So I talked to 2 or 3 people this week who were very much in the middle of it, what Joel called living between two worlds. And I had I was strongly led to move in that direction. So I think we're going to get practical. I think we got very enough last week, and I think now we're going to start talking about the fact that although everything Robert said is absolutely true, and although all of us now have some termites and can conceive of the possibility that this really is a dream, nonetheless, to most of us, most of the time, this feels pretty real and the conditioning holds forth. And the question is, what do we do when we continue to experience the reality of this, and yet we have the knowledge, or the understanding at least, not the realization, but the understanding of where we're going and what Robert would say the reality is. So that brings us to Joel, who is a bit earthier and more practical than Robert, because Joel had a much larger student body, and his teaching was 50 years ago, and Robert didn't care if anybody came to hear him talk or not, and the smaller the crowd, the better, because he just wanted to sit in the consciousness. So Robert's statement is that all there is consciousness. But then I went and listened to a Joel tape this week just to check up on where Joel was coming from, and we'll see that Joel and Robert don't have an argument. It's just a point of view, and who's being talked to. Joel is talking to a different group of people than Robert. But the tape I was listening to, Joel's first statement on there was, not his first statement, but the statement that was most important. He said the most important revelation of the infinite way, which is his teaching, is that God is consciousness. And of course Robert's teaching is that all there is consciousness, and those two statements are exactly the same. Joel used the word God because he's talking to essentially a Christian Judaic student body who, he's talking to the non-Orthodox Christians, essentially the Christian Scientists and new branches of Christianity that were beginning to have some sense of reality. And God says, Robert says all there is consciousness. He does not use the word God because the word God has meaning for everybody. And whatever the word God means for you, that's wrong. That's not it. All there is consciousness. But anyway, Joel says the most important revelation of the infinite way is that God is consciousness. That the two are so not God and consciousness are the same. So it's exactly the same statement that Robert made. And then Joel said that the second equally important revelation of the infinite way, and this is what set it apart from Christian Science and the others, is that God is consciousness is individual consciousness. And by individual consciousness, he means your consciousness, my consciousness. So the infinite way is based on the teaching that God is individual consciousness. Not God is expressing itself as individual consciousness, because now there's two. There's God and the individual consciousness. The statement is that God is consciousness, and God's consciousness is individual consciousness. And he goes on immediately to point out that this doesn't mean that each individual consciousness, what are there, 10 of us here, that we each get 1/10 of God consciousness, or actually 1/6 billionth, if you will. It is not that God's consciousness is divided up, parceled into the individual consciousness. The statement is that all of God consciousness is each individual consciousness. Okay? And of course that makes absolutely no sense in a material consciousness. We have to get into a spiritual consciousness. In a material consciousness, there's quantity and quality and division and separation, and in material consciousness things divide up. If I have a loaf of bread and we're to share it, we slice it into 10 slices. That's how you share things in material consciousness. You divide. In spiritual consciousness, you multiply. And you do it like Jesus did it with the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish that he fed the 5,000 with. What you do is you put the loaf of bread in a sack where people can't see it, and you tear off a piece and hand it to this person. Then you reach in there and tear off a piece and hand it to this person. You reach in there and tear off a piece and hand it to this person. And the pieces keep coming out of the bag, because this is a multiplying consciousness. This is a spiritual consciousness, and what we're dealing with is an infinite consciousness, not a loaf of bread in a bag. Okay? Do you get the difference? Spiritual consciousness multiplies, and material consciousness divides. So, God is consciousness, what we'll call God consciousness, and that God consciousness is also individual consciousness, and I do mean precisely, exactly, your consciousness, your individual consciousness, the consciousness that you are thinking with right now and hearing this with. That consciousness is God consciousness. And this clarifies, or begins to clarify, what we do when we're living between two worlds. When we're aware of the truth, in quotes, because it's not our realization yet, that all there is consciousness, and we're sitting here in our individual consciousness, because it gives us an approach to living while we're dealing between the material conditioning and the spiritual reality. If we go within, if we meditate, if we practice going to the silence, in that silence we suddenly have access to all of God consciousness. when we're in our material sense, then we're in our sense of limitation, and it's like there's a wall around us, and I'm really in my little consciousness here, and it's probably no larger than my skull, because we tend to think of our consciousness as in our brain inside the skull. But if we go into meditation and get into the silence, if I can get to where there's no Lee, then I am in fact in contact with God consciousness. And that means I'm in contact with all of God consciousness. I'm in contact with infinity in every area. Now, how does this help in living between two worlds? Well, when I'm in that state of consciousness, when I am meditating and I am reaching out to God, to whatever extent I'm successful in doing it, to that extent there's an inflow from God consciousness into what we're calling the individual consciousness. God pours into the individual consciousness. Barbara, I guess she got it from Joel, always had this picture of a funnel, where the big end of the funnel is open, and that's God consciousness, and the little pipe is what comes into our consciousness, and how much of God we're aware of determines the size of the spout of the funnel. And God's pouring through the funnel into our individual consciousness. Of course, if we have no sense of limitation of ourselves, then the spout of the funnel is infinite. But typically we have a funnel. But in any event, to the extent that I make contact with the allness of God consciousness, to that extent it pours into my individual consciousness. So what does that do? Well, what's in my individual consciousness then becomes expressed in my mind. It becomes an idea or a thought or a creative breakthrough or a spiritual revolution or a click or just an idea about how to do what I've been trying to figure out how to do for the past 10 days or, but it becomes a thought, an idea in my mind. It now has words to it, an understanding to it. It's now coming down into this plane. And then, with my hands, I do something. I paint a painting, if it's a creative thought, or I write some poetry, if it's a creative thought, or I write a book, if it's a literary thought, or I build a bridge, if it's an engineering thought, or I raise a kid, if it's that kind of a thought. The God consciousness has become individual consciousness, has become a thought, has become expressed through the actions I take as a result of the input that I received, as a result of the direction that I received. And what I do from that flow is perfect and exactly what I need to do, and the thing that leads to my spiritual growth or my fulfillment or whatever I need. Those things that I do have the perfection of spiritual truth about them. So this is the way that I set out to live this material life that I'm in, that I think I'm in, while I'm trying to become full-time aware of the truth that Robert talks about, or the truth of the statement that God is consciousness, and that consciousness is my individual consciousness. It also expresses as not only as my actions, but it also expresses as my experience. This is what we. Let's stop just for a second. We're talking about starting with God consciousness, which is the highest sense of mystical. Okay? Then we're bringing it to individual consciousness, which is the individual consciousness of a mystic. Okay? Who then realizes it in his or her mind. Now we're in the mental realm. Now we're in the area of metaphysics. We've dropped out of mysticism into metaphysics. And then it externalizes. And now we've dropped out of metaphysics, or we've watched the truth of metaphysics work, and now we're into material. So there's a progression from the mysticism, from the total Godhead type mysticism to the God consciousness, the Christ mysticism, to metaphysics, the mental state, to the material state. So now you can see what the state is of the material and the metaphysical and the mystical. And that's how the flow works. I forget where I was going before I went there.
You said also it expresses as my experience.
Oh yeah, it expresses as my experience. The other fundamental principle of the infinite way is that my experience is the outpicturing of the content of my consciousness. And what I've been describing is the process whereby that happens, where through the active meditation, the inflow is spiritual, but the inflow is of spiritual truth. And what I am now manifesting through this process is the outpicturing of spiritual truth. Remember that there's nothing material about God, so that all this inflow is spiritual. There's nothing material coming in. It's all spiritual. And the spiritual truths are of abundance and employment and fulfillment and companionship and all those types of things. Think about the truth about God, about the one allness that we all are, and the spiritual truths that are pouring in are those kinds of things rather than the individual material world divisive type truths. This makes a lot of the things that Jesus said really understandable. First of all, to take no thought for tomorrow what you will eat or what you'll drink or what you'll put on. What he's saying is, don't spend your time thinking about the material things. And also, don't go to God for material things. What he's saying is, he says, keep your mind stayed on the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. What he's saying is, go into meditation, make contact with the totality of God, and all these things will appear. If, on the other hand, I go to God for food, God doesn't have any food. Food's material. God doesn't have any food. God can't give me food. If I go to God for something material, it can't happen. God doesn't have anything material. There isn't anything material. Joel is in absolute agreement with Robert about that. Jesus also said, if you see me, you see my Father. All right. God is consciousness, is individual consciousness. And Jesus is saying, if you see me in my state of individual consciousness, you see in God consciousness. The other quote out of the Bible is Jesus, I guess, quoting God as saying, all that I have is thine. That's the sense that it's not a piece of God consciousness, it's individual consciousness. It's that all of God consciousness is available. All of God, the infinity is there, available to us. The alternative is to do it in the material world. And if we do it in the material world, then we have to come up with our own ideas, and we just introduced fallibility. Our own ideas may be right or they may be wrong. The ideas that came from God as a result of opening ourselves in meditation are truth. If we do things materially, we have to divide things up, like I was saying earlier, and we've got to make sure that we get ours, and we have to, do all the human consciousness concepts of taking care of ourselves. And of course, these don't work, and there will always be somebody stronger who will be better at taking care of themselves than I am at taking care of myself. And, the whole human material thing doesn't work. But that's the alternative to doing it through the meditative, mystical consciousness way. Be aware that whether you're doing it, if you're in human consciousness, then you're doomed to deal with this human sense of what's going on. The materialistic sense of stuff is just a sense of stuff. There is no material world still. Joel will say, this does say point blank, there is no material creation. What we have is a spiritual God, and we have a spiritual creation, and we have a material sense of that creation. And that material sense of creation is what we're talking about when we talk about world mind radiating its beliefs as. The material sense of creation is what we're talking about. That's the kid's sense. When we're talking about the script and kid work, the kid's sense of creation is the material one. There's not enough, and I'm not good enough in all these material thoughts. But it's a material sense. There is no material creation. So living between two worlds has two sides to it. One is learning to go within and make contact with the source. Ideally, and the big book strongly suggests this in the first 164 pages, ideally we start our day with meditation, and we get filled. We open the flow and get our individual consciousness filled with this God consciousness, this spiritual God consciousness. It's not even manifested into mental yet. It's not even ideas or thoughts, but we make this contact, hoping for the intuitive thought or inspiration. And then we go through the day, letting it unfold and carrying out the activities as they are presented to us, rather than making them up ourselves. And this is the way that works. The flow is in us, and we go out in the day, and things start happening, and we get a hunch about this, and we do this and that, and we're led here and there, and our day unfolds as a result of the input that we got as a result of the early morning meditation. And of course, if we're truly greedy, we start throwing in a noon meditation and an afternoon meditation and an evening meditation so that we can keep that stockpile full, so that all our activities throughout the day are divinely inspired, have this intuitive sense and feel of rightness, which they will if you are sufficiently close to your last meditation, your last contact with that source. And we also need to practice the other side. We need to unlearn. This is sort of where the termites came in. We need to unlearn the human way of thinking. We need to learn to take no thought for the practical things. like food, like what we shall eat, or where we shall be clothed, or what we will put on, or we need to learn. And this is sort of interesting, but we need to learn not to believe all the practical input that we get continuously from the material mind, because the material mind's sense of practicality is based on there isn't enough. And we got to take care, and we got to conserve, and I won't get mine, and there won't be enough, and all this stuff. Okay, so we have to unlearn all the common horse sense. I have been in church and heard a preacher quote, "But take no thought for tomorrow, what you will eat or what you will drink or what you will put on," and heard the minister say, "Of course, that's not practical today." Okay? Which gives you a sense of the consciousness of the minister, because it was perfectly practical in Jesus' world, which was full of Roman troops and all sorts of rather practical shit, I suppose. If you looked around and saw it, I mean, it was no more practical then than here, but it's infinitely practical. So Joel would say that we should be practical in the sense of when it has manifested and it's in front of us, we don't waste it. We treat it with respect. We treat it as a gift. We treat it as grace, but we don't waste it, and we don't be flagrant or throw stuff away or not take care. We don't be irresponsible for the people who are in the relationship class. We don't be irresponsible. We're appropriate in the way we treat what's given us. But we are not practical in the sense that we think that there won't be enough, or that we won't be able to do this, or that we're not educated enough to undertake this, or that all the various material senses that people have about things we should do. I was talking to somebody who had an opportunity to go to a spiritual retreat, and she was going to wait to see if there was enough money. And my comment is, if you wait and see, there won't be. Because your consciousness is focused on the lack of money. The lack of enough money to do that. What you do is sign up. You don't pay attention to the practical requirement that you have the money before you sign up. What you do is you go within, make contact with God, know your oneness with God, let the spiritual God idea of abundance flow into you, and expect it to manifest. And then that's the best sense I can give you of what I mean by don't be practical in your planning. Don't believe the material sense of limitations in the planning. So we need to unlearn our material habits, and we need to develop our meditation and our ability to get into the silence. We need to expand the size of the spout on the funnel. And this is the process of learning how to live between two worlds when we're in one state, and working on the other. There's enough for him. Okay, let's open it up. Questions? Comments? Snickers? But that's not practical. You can't do this. Yes?
Why would the consciousness bother?
Why would? What consciousness bother what?
Why would it bother with the material? Why would we bother?
If you don't feel any need to bother, then don't.
I mean, just originally, like
Oh, I'm not going to go into creation myths.
But no, I don't mean creation. I mean, it's just like everything's there. It's full.
That's true, and if you know that, then there's no reason to listen to anything I said tonight. If your experience is that 24/7, then you are not living between two worlds. And
Now I'm experiencing it.
this talk was not for you. To the extent that you're there.
To the extent that I'm Berta,
Yeah, if you're Berta, what we're talking about is, see, the reality is that you're not Berta.
Right.
But to the extent that you think you're Berta, then you think you're in this world, and you think you got to pay your taxes, and you think this and that, and the question that has come up several times in the past couple of weeks actually is, what do I do while I'm knowing that I'm not Berta, but
Here I am.
compulsively acting like I'm Berta? Compulsively acting like I'm Berta. Unable to not be Berta. And the answer is you work on the two sides of it.
I have a question.
Sure, please.
Something that I don't understand is that if all is consciousness, if everything is consciousness and God is consciousness, then isn't the world mind God's consciousness? Isn't the material side God's consciousness? Isn't that the thoughts and actions that we have that are fed into us all the time are created in His image, the material and the spiritual? So what differentiates the two then? What distinguishes world mind from what you receive in a meditation?
How to say that? World mind, what we mean by world mind is the totality of human consciousness.
Which is God consciousness.
Which is not, it's within God consciousness in some sense, but it's in the dream. It's the material sense. It's what I was talking about when I said that as a human being we live in a material sense of the spiritual creation. Well, world mind is that part of consciousness which is locked into the material sense of spiritual creation. And the material sense is the sense that has all the error and all the wrongness and all that sort of stuff in it. It has disease and has imperfections and stuff like that, okay? So if you are coming from if I'm coming from the Lee, then I'm in tune with the material sense, and that's my experience. I'm in tune with world mind, and that's my experience. If I'm coming from the silence, from the I am, then I'm in touch with the spiritual sense, the God consciousness, and that's my experience. And that's the distinction. Sure, it's all God. There can't possibly be anything that isn't God, but it's part of the world mind is the dream part of it. Is what Joel calls the hypnosis. That's not real. That's not what's really there. It's the false sense of the real creation. It's the hypnosis. It's the false beliefs about the creation. It's the belief in the movie is real rather than recognizing the fact that the movie is just lights on a screen. It's believing that lack and hunger and war in Iraq and astronauts dying on shuttles and stuff like that is a reality, and that people are dying, and rather than realizing that all there is God consciousness, and all there is spirit, and nobody dies, nobody was born. Okay? So it's different ways of, different awarenesses of God consciousness. But the fact is that you are a spiritual being having a human experience. But if you're buying a human experience, then you're plugged into world mind, and you've got all the capacity for error. And all the capacity for seeing error and seeing, it's not there. But you have the capacity for seeing error and seeing disease and seeing sickness and seeing starvation and seeing all those things. So that's the difference.
And doesn't Joel say that there is no God operating in human affairs?
Mm-hmm.
How does that plug in with
Right,
what you said?
or Barbara, well that's the whole
Right.
point. I mean, if you're in world mind, if you're not in the meditative state and not plugged into God consciousness, then everything is God, but there is no God in your experience. And it doesn't matter what God is. It makes no difference at all what God is. What matters to you is what your experience of God is. God is God. He always has been, always will be, and will never stop, will never change, will never do anything different than He's doing right now. Nothing is ever going to change. But what's your experience?
What I'm asking is then, doesn't the God consciousness create the human experience, or the choice to focus on that instead of the God consciousness? And that's like an option provided to you in your individual consciousness?
Yeah, nobody has ever satisfactorily explained why it is that the Leelaa began. Why did God start the game? Why was there a Garden of Eden, and why did people get thrown out? And people come up with wonderful stories about that's the only way God could really love itself is if it experienced the not loving itself. And you can come up with all sorts of great stories about what the game's all about. But the fact is that there appears to be, to those of us who appear to be human, there appears to be this great game going on in which we forget that we are God consciousness and spend lifetime after lifetime and eternity rediscovering what we always were. Now, if you ask Robert, why did God do that? Robert would say, it never happened. Because once you're out of it, once you're out the top and you're looking at it, it never happened. It's like you're in a dream and all this horrible stuff's going on in the dream, and you're wondering, why is he dreaming this and all this, and then you wake up and the dream never happened, okay? So in some very real sense, in fact probably in the most real sense, it never happened. It isn't that way. There is no human consciousness, there is no human sense, there is no nothing. But to those of us here in the middle of the dream, it kind of feels like it.
That makes sense.
Can you give some examples about unlearning the human ways of thinking? Like, learning to take no thought for the practical things. Learning not to believe the practical thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Like the example I gave about the lady who is waiting to see if she has enough money before she signs up for the retreat. That's practical. Don't commit yourself to something when there might not be money because you live in debt, okay? Spiritual would be my sponsor's response to that. God's got plenty of money. And I would write the check and expect it to show up in her bank account. She would take that very impractical attitude. An example Joel uses is the idea of if you go within and you meditate and it becomes very clear to you what it is you're supposed to, what you're led to do in life, it may appear to be a very impractical thing to undertake. It's not practical to decide that you want to do something that would apparently take, 12 years of education and such like, and you've got a kid and a kid on the way, and that's not practical. But if you had the real clear sense as a result of your meditation that you were directed by God to do it, then you would set out and do it with the confidence that everything you needed would be provided for you, okay? That would be very impractical to all the people around you. You can't do that. That's ridiculous. Following your dream might appear to be very impractical. Following your fantasy is very impractical. The difference is whether you are correctly hearing the still small voice.
How can you tell the difference? I think I know that.
If you can't, you can't. What you have to do is try it and refine your truth. When that sense is working, there's no doubt. You know what you're supposed to do. If you're not thinking about it, you will do the right thing.
And then that happens, and then I'm frightened out of my wits and get snatched back into earth.
Mm-hmm. That's part of growing spiritually. That's the reason for script class and kids work and stuff like that. That's exactly why Barbara had why script and kid work came about, is that Barbara had students who had been her students for 20 or 25 years who were getting very, very high, and then they snap back. They're higher than a kite, and then 5 minutes later they're snapping at their husband, or whoever their best needle is. Yeah, the fact is that it's
And really bizarre things like wake up and know where somebody is across the country who's run away, go there, find them like immediately, then get all freaked out about it, and close off that part of my mind.
That's what script and kid work is about. Your kid got scared. Obviously, I don't have any idea why, but that's exactly why the script and kid work came about, is because that kind of thing happened. It's a spiritual gymnasium. We practice and we build the muscle. We open that intuition, and on the one hand, and develop that ability, and on the other hand, like I say, we practice dropping being practical. And when you get into the script and kid work, we also work on reassuring our kid and teaching her that that's not truth, that it's not inevitably going to happen, that every time something good happens, the other shoe's going to fall, and stuff like that. So there's a process of building trust and reassurance there. That it's all part of the deal. What did you have? Did you get?
I guess, it was just sort of my comment. The closest that I'm getting to this is like what you were saying, the idea and the hunch. And for me, I hear a lot of shoulds, and what I'm trying to do is not do the shoulds,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that's like the closest, and I'm also feeling like my kid is just screeching in terror. What are you going to do? You have to have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
The money and all of this, you got to figure this out. What do people take? And it's just...
Yep, that's what we're talking about. That's why, that's why we started with termites, and that's why we're talking. It's a deprogramming process. We are thoroughly conditioned by everything around us, in our schools and usually our preachers and ministers and rabbis, and the books we read, and certainly the television and the situation comedies, and especially the advertisements we hear and all this. We're fully conditioned to a very practical world of limitation. And we have to deprogram it.
And you do get constant reinforcement
Mm-hmm.
to not do that.
That's right. constant.
Because I was told I couldn't do what I did, and it's just like,
Sure.
and I just follow my instincts, and it's all miraculous, and there it is. But then the people get mad and tell you, and that really brings out the kid.
And so you stop hanging out with those people.
That's why I'm sitting here.
That's right. That's why you're sitting here. The answer is, my old three things. What you do is daily you work on your meditation practice. You develop that ability and you expand the spout of the funnel. And daily you read some spiritual truth or expose yourself to some form of spiritual truth, a tape or a book or something, And the third thing is that you hang out in the consciousness that believes what you're trying to believe rather than the consciousness that doesn't. You go into a room full of angry people, you get angry. You go into a room full of depressed people, it's depressing. You go into a room full of people that are laughing and you start chuckling without any idea what they're laughing at, So you come to a higher teaching and you feel it. And you go to a lower teaching and you feel it, And you learn to recognize the lie when it's presented to you. And you say nonsense. Or whatever your word is. You'll find a word that's right for it. You say nonsense. Like that's what I do with disease, People say there's a lot of flu going around. And inside I say nonsense. Outside I say, oh yeah. But inside I say nonsense, If you had the flu, nonsense, Anything people tell me about physical things that are likely to happen, nonsense, That's not true. There is no such thing, You just don't let it in, You stand guardian at the door to your mind and watch what you allow in. I don't watch news. I don't read newspapers. I don't watch situation comedies. I just don't go there. Ever.
I'm watching a couple of people at work who I don't choose to be around that much, who are just delving into that sickness, illness thing, and I can see this woman has all this chaos going on, and so she started to have pains in certain places and medical tests, and now she's starting to demand blood tests for cervical cancer, and she wants, MRIs, and it's talking very big and dramatic and serious. And to me, it's almost this like pleasure and glee in her at the thought that there might be something that big coming up. And it's just, when you say nonsense, whenever it's going on, I feel like now, what's really going on here? Just that kind of questioning comes to me.
Well, that's kid. She's obviously got a serious kid problem. I mean, she badly needs to be sick so that she won't be invisible or something,
Something.
But just in general, against impersonal, against world mind, world mind just truths that they're constantly broadcasting. It's about the way the world works. You'd like to say nonsense on that. An example is impractical. I have no health insurance. I have no any sort. I have no HMO. I have no health insurance. I have no catastrophic insurance. I have absolutely no, protection against any form of illness. And that's very impractical for a person my age, right? And my attitude is nonsense. I also haven't seen a doctor since 1986 because I haven't needed one. Because I haven't, and the reason I haven't had any problems since 1986 is that I haven't seen a doctor. So there's an example of being that's totally impractical to never see a doctor. What if I have prostate cancer? 80% of the men get prostate cancer before they're 100, or something like that. Nonsense. Maybe they do, but that's because they're listening to the beliefs. Nonsense, that's an example of my attitude is totally impractical. I had my teeth cleaned the other day, and I get my teeth cleaned just because they feel better when they're unscuzzed. And she says, are we going to be able to get you to take an X-ray today? And I said, no. She said, oh, okay, they want to X-ray my teeth, to see if there's anything wrong. I won't let them X-ray my teeth. Nonsense. There's nothing wrong. Why would I let you X-ray my teeth? I won't let them look because there's no reason to look. And yet, if I thought they needed to look, then there would be a reason to look, you see?
I have a question about that, though. It's weird. I feel like I can believe that in my mind, and I'm convinced of it. And when other people are sick, I try to tell them, like my sister, that all the time. But when something goes wrong with me and I'm not healthy, I have a hard time focusing on perfection, that all is right and everything in me is fine because something's hurting.
That's right. That's why we have practitioners. What you do is call somebody else and ask them to know the truth for you.
Okay.
Yeah, if your arm hurts, it's very difficult to realize that you don't have an arm.
To try to think, okay, nothing's wrong. This is a dream. Nothing's wrong with me, and there's perfection.
That's why we have practitioners in spiritual healing. If I get to the point where I think I might need a spiritual healing, then I'm past being able to heal myself. Because the fact that I've recognized the problem means that I've blocked. I've already failed to stand guard at the door. I've already blown my chance. I've already bought it. Now I had a long, hard fight to reverse that. Or I can call somebody and say, hey, know the truth for me, and turn my consciousness over to them and get lifted out of it in 10 minutes. So if I have a problem, I call Elsie. She has a problem, she calls me. I don't fix me, she doesn't fix her.
And yet my kid is afraid to do something like that, like to call you and say that, because that would be burdening you with my nonsense.
No, actually what it would do, it would force me to go within and know the truth, and I would get uplifted. So it would be a gift. I don't get nearly enough of those calls. So my spiritual healing is not up to standard. If I got pushed more, I'd do better.
I've had experience with both sides of what you're describing, of making that call, and I've called you, and I've called up sometimes, and everything changed from the call. But I've also had, and it's obviously kid, I've also had a feeling of something's going on, and it must be kid that I know I can call, and this is the moment now where the call will come in, and I don't, and I'm like, I desire to wallow in it. Because I remember one time describing that to you in the morning meeting, and you said something, you broke it immediately. You said like, well, enjoy wallowing. And I was like, well, shit, because it was like, I was no longer feeling like, well, with me, I was
not a lot of sympathy there, was there?
But
You'll get out of it.
It kicked me out of the feeling of it, but I've experienced kind of being aware that this is where that call, which some part of me knows it would change everything. Sometimes I did.
And especially if there's part of you that knows it would change everything, then it certainly will.
Well, it's hard to call and ask for help if you're busy judging yourself for having the believing the lie.
Yeah, if you think she'd be higher than that, then you're probably going to wallow in it a lot. But that's not, and sometimes you want to wallow in it, in which case,
it didn't feel like a sense of judgment. It just felt like, I don't know, it felt like the lower lip coming out like the kid, like, I just want to, you won't be in it.
Cool. Certainly won't be ecstatic for me. No problem with that. Enjoy it. I typically don't choose to wallow. I very seldom have any signs at all, and if I do, I don't hesitate to call it.
Well, part of it with me is, as a kid, I never got sick. And I used to be so resentful at all the kids that got sniffles and colds and flus because they got off school. I remember making up illness as a child because I wanted a damn day off. And there's some connection. I get that same feeling. Like, I'm very healthy. I really don't get stuff coming at me. And I think there's some throwback to that kid feeling like
I want a day off. That goes on for me.
So take a day off.
I don't allow that. That's part of it.
I'm dead on end at what we're talking about right here. Like, after we had class last week, I woke up the next morning with this headache. And it was excruciating. Never had a headache like that. And I just thought, it'll go away. Well, it got worse and worse, and I got to where I was vomiting and had to go to the emergency ward because I couldn't stop vomiting. The whole time I'm going, okay, talk to my kid. Okay, what's wrong? There's got to be something wrong. Because I knew my logical sense was that this is script, this is kid, this is, all this stuff, but I could not get out of it.
That's true. We call somebody immediately.
So in that particular,
absolutely. Call somebody. And it doesn't have to be some practitioner. Call anybody in the class.
Okay.
All you need is somebody to know that it's script. Because you don't really, you're telling yourself, but you don't really know it. You bought it, see? Well, once you bought it, you're in trouble. So call anybody that can know the truth, and you can get lifted, just like that.
And the pain can go away.
Oh, yeah.
They gave me, it was ridiculous, because I had 3 different shots of these medications, and it would not go away. And the headache was, I was on medication for like 3 days. And it's just now subsiding, and I was all fine with it going away, and I talked to my brother, which showed, I left a message for Anna about this yesterday. I talked to my brother yesterday, who's a physician. He got me right back into it, because I didn't tell him what had happened, and then somehow he found out what's going on. He needs to go to an MRI, blah, 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 blah.
See?
And I started...
Doctor consciousness.
Yeah.
That's why I don't want to.
And the funny thing was, the funny thing was, my initial reaction was, I don't have the money, I don't have insurance, I have all that stuff, because what happened last week cost me a bundle that I don't have. And my initial thing was, I know I'm okay, Joe, and I kept saying all this kind of stuff, but then there was a little twinge in there going, I could feel just a little twinge of excitement at the idea of being the center of attention, and my whole family's going to run in and worry about me, and I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
And I thought, because the
next
step was, wait a minute.
You flat on the slab in great pain, yeah, go for it.
It's just funny, because it was just these feelings I could feel, and the second I felt them, I knew what was going on, but it was getting out of this where I'm struggling still.
Yeah, the answer is you call somebody and get lifted. Okay. Anybody in the class can do it.
Isn't that essentially what prayer groups are for in churches and stuff? Just to be able to request that someone else meditate on your concern?
Sure. And if enough people believe in that the prayer group works, it'll work. Praying doesn't work. Praying for health doesn't work. Praying for health exacerbates the problem. Because if I'm praying for health, what I'm doing is affirming that I'm sick. And that means it's in my consciousness, and therefore I'm going to manifest it. But interestingly enough, if I get a bunch of people together, all of them to pray for my health, and I believe that'll work, then it will. Because it doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. It's the consciousness that matters. Yeah, prayer groups work.
I'm having a really hard time believing, I've got this terminal unique thing going, because my issues are lifelong, there's no solution out there.
That's
and
true.
Yet, it appears to me my body is not working right, and it causes me X, Y, and Z discomfort and all of that. And it's like, I can't just go and bam, it's gone. Go to somebody. That's what my head is saying.
Yeah. And to the extent that you're convinced that that's true, it's true.
If I go to a practitioner even with that mindset,
it may take several tries. It might work the first time. Now we got a bunch of things going on. When we go for a spiritual healing, there's at least 2 important things involved. The first is how high the practitioner can get. If you go to a Joel or a Jesus, the odds are about 90% it's going to be out of you in no time. Or I guess Joel's healing rate was 85%, and he was doing 135 cases a day, so you can imagine how long he spent on each one. And this guy's cooking. He was healing people before he got the message, before he got the request. I love the story where somebody sent him a telegram asking for help. And they sent a telegram to him in Los Angeles, but he'd gone to Hawaii. And they got their help and sent him a letter thanking him. And by now they'd heard that he'd gone to Hawaii, so they mailed the letter to Hawaii. And the letter thanking him for the help and the telegram got to him at the same time. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that they had reached out to Joel's consciousness, and it was high enough that they got lifted. Joel doesn't need to know about it. It's just the consciousness. So that's how easily it can work. But the other side of it is how invested you are in whatever the problem is, how clinging your kid is to
and
it.
how, it's like I can't control that in a way.
What you do,
except doing the kid work, I guess.
You're doing the kid work and working on it and doing the meditation, expanding the size of the spout, and asking for help. See, your kid won't even let you ask.
Yeah, it's not never going to occur to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, now it's occurring to you.
And does it always stick? Or do I revert back to where, to like...
I don't know what you will do.
Well,
every time you get lifted, you never quite slide back all the way you are. You've heard the truth. Now, whether it'll be in your consciousness tomorrow, I don't know, but you've heard the truth, and it'll be there easier next time, and you may remember it tomorrow. I don't know what the story is. But, and like I said, Joel had like an 85% healing rate, not 100%.
I heard Joel talk about Jesus healing, and he said it's really interesting. No one went back and checked whether any of those healings out 6 months later, because obviously it's as high as the teacher or the consciousness that you go to, and they were all healing. But who checked a year later to see if the blind man had gone blind again? Because he was saying that unless you were from within, to have it make so even whoever Jesus healed could have lost it a year later, because they were like relying on Jesus consciousness.
Jesus always said, "Go and sin no more." And sin means hold the false concept. Sin is not a being naughty thing. Remember, sin is having the false belief. So what Jesus was saying, you're healed. Now go and with a clean consciousness. Don't think these thoughts anymore, is what he meant.
He also would say, your faith has healed you. Oftentimes it was, I remember that so many times, and I've drawn that in this account that you believe.
Like the lady that touched his robe and got healed. But that's the same thing as the telegram getting the healing from Joel without him knowing about it. Yeah.
How much of that is Jesus and how much of that is the person's consciousness? Or I guess all one.
Well, the fact is that there was a consciousness that Jesus had the consciousness, but if she believed the tree would heal her and managed to touch the tree, she would have been healed. If she believed it with the intensity that she believed that Jesus could heal her, but the reason she believed with the intensity that she did that Jesus could heal her is because of Jesus' consciousness, infusing her.
Just like what Rorschach provided for you or did not provide for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So does opening up the size of that funnel, is that like a dependent on the amount of time that you meditate? Is there like a degree or, like a certain prescription for, like the amount that you want to receive that consciousness? I mean, is it dependent on the time that you put into it?
No. It can become infinitely open like that. But that's not most people's experience.
So it takes practice.
Most people's experience is that it's blue-collar work, and the pipe's getting bigger even if you don't have any awareness that it is. But the fact is that what you work on getting into the silence and having the experience. And once you, having arrived at the point where you are experiencing the presence of God, that's as much as you're going to do. So, having been there and come back, no need to sit there for the rest of the hour. If you're meditating for an hour and that happens in the first 3 minutes, it's fine to sit there for the rest of the hour, but there's no need to because you've had the experience. So it's not linear practical in the material sense, but discipline means the way of the disciple. So discipline is a good thing. The other good news is that while you're doing this meditation, whether it's working or not, it's working. And you are getting, every time you meditate, a little trickle more of God consciousness in you, whether you're aware of it or not. And whatever is in your consciousness must have a picture. So every single little tiny trickle of increase in your consciousness is going to change the picture out here. So the picture will get better. Whether you had any breakthroughs or clicks or super anything at all, it doesn't matter. We're talking metaphysics. We're talking metaphysical law. As your consciousness changes, the picture changes. If your consciousness improves through your contact with God, the picture improves. Becomes more harmonious, becomes more characterized by those things we associate with God, like harmony and joy and bliss and all that stuff. It must reflect immediately, instantaneously, the content of your consciousness. It may take a short period of what we call time to fill out the storyline, but it is changing as your consciousness changes. So the work is to experience silence. Barbara said that she considers minimum work for her serious students is a tape a day, which means an hour-long Joel tape, a chapter a day, which means 12 pages out of a Joel book, and 4 meditations a day, morning, noon, and evening. And then a nighttime meditation is the 4th one, and that's world work. That's healing consciousness. That's knowing the truth about the world or some aspect of the world that's troubling you, like knowing that there's no biological weapons anywhere, let alone in Iraq or whatever world work you want to work on. But she considered that minimum daily work for a serious student. And of course, if you're truly greedy, then you do more. But that's not practical.
Yeah, it is.
Is it? It's the most practical thing you can do. I would also point out something else Joel said, which is borne out by any expert you check with, that in fact, we only really need 3 or 4 hours sleep a day. Sleep. Sleep is the time that your brain needs to have dreams and what are the psychological stuff that it needs that you'll go crazy if you don't sleep. Okay, so you need 3 or 4 hours of sleep for those functions to take place. You may need 7 hours of rest for your muscles to drop off the lactic acids and do whatever else that has to happen, for your body to clean itself and rest. But that rest can be awake resting. So perfectly reasonable to go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up at 2 in the morning and lay there and listen to a tape and meditate for a couple hours. It's just as good for your body as if you slept those 2 hours and you've gotten those 2 hours in and you've gotten in your hour tape and you've gotten in an hour of meditation. So you can keep that in mind. Yeah, stop silent. Let's sit in it. Some people, when they call to get lifted in the morning, are very careful to call between 6:30 and 7:45 because they know I'm over at the morning meeting, and that way they can put in their request for help and they don't have to talk to me. and admit that they're sick or deal with the issue of whether they're bothering me or any of that stuff. And I think that's a great idea, and then if I have 2 or 3 phone calls, I can just lay down on the couch for 3 minutes and batch process you, so it works really good for me, so that's a perfectly acceptable solution.
To leave you a message is what
You can do that, fine, machine's on.
Email.
Feel free to leave a message. And the details don't matter.
No.
I need to be lifted, it's a perfectly fine statement. There's an announcement there, Dulcie. For those of you who know Dulcie and those who don't, Dulcie is having a retreat at the end of March, a 3-day retreat down in by Joshua Tree. And it'll be, the name of the retreat is, as her retreats are often called, Entering the Sacred Silence. And in fact, it will be 2 days of practicing going into the silence, exactly in conjunction with what we're talking about here. It will be 2 days spent.
I just called yesterday, so there's still spaces available.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. And if your script class is that Sunday, why, you'll be back in time for it anyway, because it's over at noon, so you could get back by 3 if you wanted to, or you could go walk in the desert, which might be more fun. So there is that. There are 3 places left in the script class, and then they're going to be absolutely closed. So that's where that's at. All 3 on Sunday. That's it. I love you all.